Peter Jones. I grew up in San Diego. I'm not a native, but I've lived here off and on since 1968.
And how did your interest in comic books begin? What was your first memory?
Well, I actually have a picture of me with my first comic. I think it would have been my mom or dad just kind of bringing one home as a treat. And I have an older brother, so he would usually get to flip through them first, and then I would read them. And it was kind of a slow evolution. You start off by reading them, and then you'd read them a couple of times, and they'd kind of get tossed out. Not by me, but they would get tossed out. I guess they were considered disposable. But at some point, I think when I was about seven, 6 or 7, I started to save them. And just go like, don't touch this pile. I'm saving these. I want to keep them because I wanted to read them over and over again. And they're dog-eared now, but I started saving them. And then from there, you start looking for back issues because you'd be reading one, and then there'd be like an ad for another comic book, and I go, wow, I got to go find that comic book. Oh, it's off the stands already. Where am I going to find it? And there wasn't really a venue for that. I mean, nowadays you've got comic book stores, you've got eBay, you've got comic conventions. I mean, you've got a lot of ways to find old comic books. But then, at least for me, as a child, pretty much you were limited to the occasional garage sale or rummage sale. The San Diego Union used to once in a while run free ads for kids. If you were under 12, you could put an ad of like 50 words in for free, and I would say, "What it? I want to buy comic books," and you get a bunch of phone calls, and my mom would kind of drive me around to a few houses, and I would buy comics from these guys. So that's really when I started to evolve into more of a collector. I was buying them off the stands, but I wanted the ones I missed too. I wanted the older ones, and you'd hear about these, and you'd see them. You'd see them in an old ad. They called them the house ads, and I wanted them. And I've been collecting ever since. And then one morning, I think it was a Saturday morning, there was an article in San Diego Union saying today there's going to be a comic convention, for collectors and artists. And I thought, wow, I want to go to this. And I asked my mom if she'd take me. So she drove me down to the Grand Hotel in downtown San Diego and just kind of dropped me off. I don't remember how much it cost to get in, 50 cents or $1. What do you think now? What is it now? $175 for 4 days of Comic Con now. It's probably $1 to get in, and it was a one-day trial run for the 3-day con was in the summer of 1970. This was just kind of a prequel to see if it was even going to fly, and there were, I guess, there were maybe 100 people there, a lot of hippies and college students, I guess. And I walked in and I saw more comic books than I'd ever seen in my life, and I was just enchanted. It was like better than Christmas. I mean, I didn't have much money. I mean, I had $5 or something from birthday money, but you could buy Silver Age comics for 5, 10 cents, 12 cents, something like that, and they had them in stacks.
How old were you?
I was 10. I was 10 when I went to that one. So very young, probably younger than a lot of the people, a lot of the other folks. But it was absolutely wonderful, and I've been going ever since. we kind of schedule summers around Comic Con. It's like, well, if we're going to travel, we got to get back before con, or we got to wait till con is over, and then we can go do this trip. So it's become this thing for me every year to go to the comic convention, and I still love it. I still look forward to it, and I collect. I reached that age where I guess you're supposed to kind of outgrow those things, but I've been collecting my life. I mean, I have a life too, but I've been collecting my whole life, and I've amassed a lot of comics.
What comics were you collecting? Were there any artists, writers, or any specific titles they were vested in?
Yeah, I liked all the Superman titles. Pretty much anything with Superman on it. Even Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane, Legion of Superheroes. I liked Batman. I liked in Marvel, I guess Spider-Man, Fantastic Four. I got into the DC War books, Sergeant Rock, Our Army at War. I guess I have pretty eclectic tastes, and I guess the first kind of run that I committed to completing was Spider-Man. I wanted to get like all of them all the way back to the beginning to Amazing Fantasy 15, and I didn't have a lot of money, so I was a very thrifty kind of shopper. But I managed to do it. I felt like, wow, I've climbed this mountain. I've accomplished this great thing. What else is there to do? Of course, that was only the beginning. It's like, well, now I got to get a run of these, and now I got to get a run of these, and so I pretty much put together all the Silver Age DC and Marvel superhero books, and quite a big chunk of the war books. I'd say that was my focus, was the DCs and Marvels of late 50s all the way up through the 70s. And I've also branched out into other things. I collect some of the Golden Age books. I'm not trying to get like a whole run of them, but just certain ones here and there. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Yeah. I guess you could say I started with DC and Marvel superheroes, and kind of expanded from there.
So, I know your parents bought you comics. Were they supportive of you reading comics later into the future as you got older?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they never gave me any grief about it. I asked my mom if she'd drive me to this comic convention, and she did. And from then on, I mean, until I was old enough to drive, they either take the bus or they'd give me a lift. But they never said, "Why are you wasting your time on this?" or "Why are you spending your money on this?" They were supportive. I was buying Spider-Man #1, and you got up until then, I just didn't spend more than $1 or $2 on a comic. That was kind of my budget. But a friend of mine had a Spider-Man #1, and he decided he wasn't going to hang on to it. He wanted to buy something else. He offered it to me for like $50. Actually offered it for 60, and I said, I don't have 60, I have 50. I'd spent all summer kind of working for my dad, doing landscaping in the backyard to earn $50, and that was my life savings. And I really he came back and said, okay, I'll let you have it for 50. And then I was like, wow, do I really want to spend everything I have on this one comic? But I did, and I brought it home, and my folks knew that I'd gone out and blown $50 on a comic, but they were very supportive. They were like, okay, that's cool. Can we see it? And said, well, all right, that's what you like. That's cool, and I've never regretted it. Still have it. Won't part with it. So yes, they were supportive. I mean, not like they were throwing money at me, like go out and buy comics, but they always supported it as just something that I enjoyed doing. And every year they still ask, "Oh, how's the con? You're gearing up for con?" And yeah, they've always been cool about it.
Did you receive the similar support from your friends or people in the community, school, church?
Boy, back in the day, when I was in elementary school, junior high, even high school, that was something you didn't really advertise, like, oh, I collect comics, because it had a stigma to it. It had nerd written all over it, and I would say, I mean, now I don't care, but I would say probably it was into my 20s before I really went out of my way to spread the gospel. And I collect comics, and I'm proud, and everybody should read a comic book. There was a stigma to it when I was a kid. Yeah, I had within my circle of friends, there were a couple of others that were sort of into it. A couple of friends of mine would go to Comic-Con with me. And they went for a couple of years and then kind of gravitated towards other things. But I was the one that was always into it and stuck with it. So yeah, that part of my life, I guess I kept kind of secret until. And when I finally didn't keep it, sort of under wraps, it wasn't so much like comics are cool now. I just kind of said, I don't care. This is what I do. This is what I like. I mean, you kind of reach an age where you're not worried about that kind of stuff so much anymore.
So, heading to that first con, like,
Mm-hmm.
what did you take from it? Like, what was your initial reaction? I know you talked about that briefly.
Yeah.
What do you think, especially of the first two guests being Jack Kirby, Ray Bradbury, top names within comics and science fiction? What goes through your head as a 10-year-old?
Boy, I was probably awestruck. I mean, I'd read even at 10. I'd already read. I'd read a lot of works by Bradbury and Robert Heinlein. Heinlein wrote a lot of novels for younger readers. It's the kind of thing where I would have liked to see them, but there's no way I would have like gone up and said, "Hey, how's it going?" I just I would have felt like I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. Actually, that persisted for quite a long time. That whole "I'm not worthy" kind of thing. But the original, let's see, Kirby, Jack Kirby and Ray Bradbury were guests at the Summer Con of 1970, and I think that first one in March of '70. I think Forey Ackerman, the guy who started Famous Monsters of Filmline. I think he was the big guest then. That's my recollection, and. Everything seemed to be kind of self-contained in one room, kind of one ballroom downstairs. And they were just kind of table set up with lots of comics and people wheeling and dealing. And I think Shel Dorf, one of the founders, made a little speech at the beginning. It was going way back. I can't remember everything he said, but I think he just kind of welcomed everybody, I think. And I remember they showed this movie. I'm just kind of free associating here what I remember. I remember they showed a silent film, The Lost World, the one with it had stop motion animated dinosaurs, and I don't think they had a separate film room. I think they just kind of dimmed the lights and projected it against one wall, and people kept dealing comics, kind of looking at them close in the dim light. And at that point, my mom came back because I remember she sat and watched the movie, and I sat and watched it, and then I went back to going around the room and shopping for comics. But I think Forey Ackerman was a guest at that one-day show, and then Ray Bradbury and Jack Kirby were like the gods of comics and science fiction and comics respectively. That was amazing just to see them in person. And Ray Bradbury came to a lot of conventions. He was very supportive of San Diego Comic-Con. I think he was there. Well, and Jack Kirby, I think, they were both there practically every year. At some point, actually, it wasn't at a Comic-Con. Ray Bradbury was lecturing at UCSD at the Mandeville Center, and I remember that was a few years later. It must have been 15 or 16. At that point, I think I got up the nerve to just go up and say hi, or I love your books, usual kind of fanboy stuff.
What goes through your mind? So I know you bring up the March Comic Con versus the August. So you attended both? Correct?
Yeah.
So how did that March one start off? What did you have it? Like, did you get a sense of the expectation in the room of like, would this succeed or?
Yeah. Well, there were. I don't know exactly how many people attended that first one. I'm sure that number's out there somewhere. But it seemed like a pretty full room and a lot of wheeling and dealing going on, and even at the end of it, or that day, they were already advertising the one for the summer. So I think they felt pretty confident that they were going to be able to bankroll this into another show. And I said, I got to go. I want to go to this anytime they have it. I want to go to it. That's how much I enjoyed it. And when they started having the 3-day, I guess the one in the summer was a 3-day show, and the subsequent ones were usually 3 or 4 days. I usually only had enough money to get through one day. I mean, I had a budget, and by the end of the day, okay, I've spent everything I have. So typically, I was kind of a one-day member for at least the first few. It was 74, I think, is the year when I started going like all the days, and even if I ran out of money, I'd just go and hang out. But I never completely ran out of money. I could always scrape together like 37 cents or something, and I just need bus fare home. If I can find a comic for 14 cents, I can still get home. Sounds desperate, doesn't it? it was fun. It was such a blast. So yeah, it seemed like this was I mean for its for its time, this seemed like a well attended the 1 day show and the 3 day one in the summer seemed like well attended events. There was definitely a I don't know if the word hunger, but yeah, there was a demand for it, and it seemed to be making money, and they would you could buy a ticket in advance. Even then, I think you could buy a ticket in advance for the next one, whatever it was, a couple dollars or something, and you could prepay for the next year's show, and that's typically what I would do. So it seemed like it was something that was going to keep going, and it was getting a little bit bigger each time. I think 71 they had it at UCSD at the Muir campus, and then 72 is when they moved to the El Cortez. And even then, it was expanding. It was a bigger room, and they had finally had like a separate film room and other rooms for special guests and panels, and it just kept growing and growing. Does it?
Yeah, no, I actually want to talk and expand about that. What were your experiences watching the con grow as it moves to different venues? What did you think of UCSD? What did you think of it? Then ultimately, I think going to the El Cortez.
Excuse me. The thing about UCSD is, I think I mentioned before the interview started that I was actually able to walk to that con. That was the one con I actually walked to. My dad was a professor there, and we lived pretty close to the campus. So I remember walking to the con. Didn't need a ride. Spent all day there. I only had a 1 day membership. That's what it took to spend my budget then. But even then, it seemed to be growing. It was a new campus, and it seemed like I think they were using kind of the student commons area as sort of the core of the show, for the dealer's room and I think the film room. But then I think maybe people might have been staying, and maybe they might have been renting out the dorm room. Now you'd stay at the Hyatt or whatever, but I think that you could actually rent a dorm room or something to stay for the 3 days. I'm thinking that UCSD was kind of renting out, because it was in the summer anyway. I'm thinking that they were renting out space. So even then, it was starting to expand. And then the El Cortez years. You're probably going to hear this a lot, but the El Cortez, that was really, people called it the golden age of Comic-Con, I guess. But there was just something about the vibe when it moved to the El Cortez. It was, by that point, it had grown to where you're getting a fair amount of people, but still small enough that you could hang out, and people would schmooze by the pool. And at that point, you'd look over, and there's Jack Kirby drawing something, and people are kind of crowding around it. But now, if Jack were with us, if he were at Comic-Con now, there'd be a line down the hall, and you have to probably buy a ticket or something to, just to get him to sign something. But back then, it was big enough that there was a lot going on, and really all day and all night there was a lot going on, but intimate enough that that you could interact. You could interact with the creators, and it was just a wonderful time. And there's something about that El Cortez Hotel. It just had such a cool kind of feel to it. I'm not describing it very well. Those were really wonderful years for the con.
Do you have a particularly fond memory of the El Cortez?
Oh gosh, let's see. Just some kind of random thoughts. I would go to the masquerade. They had a costume contest they called the Masquerade, and I think it was 74 or 75. Before the Masquerade, they had this kind of pre-show entertainment it was choreographed to the Queen song "Killer Queen," and they had these two dancers, these two female dancers, one in black and one in white, called the Black Queen and the White Queen. And it turned out the Black Queen was actually Brink Stevens, who is a big science fiction and comic book fan, and she's kind of been part of Comic-Con for a long time, but she was I think a grad student and also a dancer. So for like 2 or 3 years in a row, she would do these choreographed acts. I just remember Killer Queen, and the following year I think they did Funeral for a Friend, and the year after that I think it was Ballroom Blitz. I don't know, it kind of blends together after a while. other random things. I remember at one masquerade, there was a guy who dressed as the Comics Code Authority. He kind of a little guy with, and he could have a really stern look on his face. And he had this big sandwich board, and he came out on stage as the Comic Code Authority and kind of, blasted everybody for being despicable and rotting people's minds. And he went on to be a comic book publisher. I think his name is Claypool. Yeah, Claypool Comics. So I'd run into him every year and say, "I remember you with the Comics Code." He said, "Oh, I'm trying to forget that." But, gosh, other memories. I just remember kind of sitting around by the pool over on the hotel side, and on into the evening, just talking comics and talking science fiction, and they had films running all night long. Let's see, 76, I think. It had to be 76 because I was finally driving. I could drive myself there and back. At midnight, they showed Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. I'd never seen a Russ Meyer film before. But, I love Russ Meyer now. Genius. But yeah, that was kind of a big deal. They packed everybody in, and they showed Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. I think it was 70, must have been 78. I think maybe Scott Shaw started doing his Oddball Comics panel where he'd pick, maybe you've heard of it, but he'd find these really just weird esoteric comics mostly from the Golden Age and the Silver Age, and then he did a slideshow about them and a lot of innuendo covers and things like that. That was just a riot. I'm pretty sure that's the first year he did it, and he did it at midnight because it was kind of risque stuff. And then after that, Ken Kruger, who was also one of the founders of Comic-Con, he did a talk about kind of X-rated comics. So that was like at 1 a.m. Just really kind of esoteric stuff that would go on in the wee hours of the morning. And my friends and I, at the time, I did have a couple of buddies who were into this. We'd stay down there like all night and hang out in the film room, or kind of hang out by the pool, and just wonderful times. I can tell you when they instituted a no nudity policy in the masquerade. I don't know if you heard this story, but I think it was probably about 75 maybe, in the costume contest. There was this couple that came up, and they were kind of looked like hippies, leftover hippies, and they were dressed in a barbarian theme. The guy actually was he had long hair, kind of a pot belly, but he was kind of doing a parody of Conan, and his girlfriend or wife was wearing kind of the slave Leia thing, like the Star Wars look, but nothing on top. Now she had this long hair kind of covering everything up, but every so often she'd kind of go out her way to flick her hair out of the way. They were a big hit. I'm sure they won a prize, but from then on, Comic-Con had a no nudity policy in the masquerade rules. So yeah, they're kind of, it got a little raucous sometimes, kind of wild and woolly days of Comic-Con, sort of an anything goes sort of thing. Tim Leary was a guest. In fact, I just went to a panel where they talked about how Tim Leary ended up being invited to Comic-Con, because I'd always wondered that. Why, he was very engaging, but he didn't really write comics or draw them. But he was a guest one year. So I went to hear him. I went to hear him speak at a panel. It was like a panel on science fiction. Chuck Norris was a guest one year. So of course everybody was asking him, what was it like to fight Bruce Lee in Return of the Dragon? And so people now will say, oh, it's not about comics anymore. It's all the the Hollywood stuff and the games and that sort of thing. But it was always kind of a broader pop culture sort of thing. The comics were a big part of it, but even back then, the programming kind of went off, branched off in different areas.
So I guess my next question is, do you feel that Comic-Con now still represents that spirit of just diversity with comics, science fiction, movies, and now video games, I would say?
Well, the comics part of it is kind of shrinking. Well, actually, maybe not so much shrinking. It's just the rest of it is growing bigger. So the comics looks like it's a smaller percentage. Excuse me. I mean, I still go to shop like the first couple of days. That's really when I start digging through boxes and I'm looking for certain books. But it does seem like each year there might be like one less kind of old time, old school dealer there, and I'm not, maybe it just gets too expensive or just too much hassle, and they figure too much trouble to set up. I'm just going to go out there and shop like everybody else. So I do think that the old, sort of the old comic book part of it is slowly shrinking, while the rest of it is expanding, and certainly all the they show the previews for all the upcoming TV shows with all the stars. But I enjoy that stuff too. I really do. I'm not willing to spend the night waiting out in Hall H, waiting out in line for Hall H. Well, I'll do that once. My wife and I will look at the schedule and okay, well we got to go to the Doctor Who panel, so we do. So we'll sit out. We'll get out. This summer we got out there like 3 or 4 a.m. and waited in line for Hall H, and we just decided that's the day we're going to do the Hall H stuff. But otherwise, I would go to those things, but I'm not willing to give up all the other stuff just to wait in line to get into Hall H or Ballroom 20. And by all the other stuff, I don't mean just looking for comics. I like to go to a lot of the panels. I really do, especially the panels on the kind of geared towards the the Golden Age, the Golden Age creators and Silver Age guys who are still with us. I like to see them when they speak, or the science fiction authors. I go to a lot of panels, and so waiting in line for the Hollywood stuff means I'm going to miss 5 panels or something just to get in to see one thing in Hall H or Ballroom 20. So I don't. If it sounds like I'm griping about that, I'm really not. I think anything that gets over 100,000 people to come to a pop culture event and maybe pick up a comic along the way, I think is great. So I don't have a problem with all the Hollywood taking over Comic-Con. It really isn't. It was always a pop culture kind of thing. It always had connections with science fiction and movies and not just comics. It's just that the movies part of it, I think, has expanded, and the comics part of it has kind of remained, or kind of hit a peak, and maybe even is gradually shrinking. But I still enjoy the ambiance. I mean, you're fighting through crowds and everything on Saturday, but I just love it. And waiting in line can be kind of a drag, but you can always find somebody to talk to. Oh, you like Doctor Who, or you like whatever. I mean, you certainly find common ground with just about anybody. So it's a little distressing that the comics part of it, hasn't really expanded. I mean, I don't know what comic sales are like now, but I know they're not what they don't have the sales numbers that they had 30 or 40 years ago, certainly. But it's encouraging to see. It's encouraging to look over now and then and see a kid, digging through boxes looking for comics. Go, all right, they're gonna pass the torch. They'll keep the hobby going.
You've attended every con since the original.
Yeah.
Did you get to know the founders of Comic-Con?
Only recently, except for Shel Dorf. It turned out I lived in Ocean Beach for a while. And it turned out that Shel lived kind of right around the corner from me. He was kind of reclusive at that point in his life, but every so often I would get together with him, and the local chapter of the National Cartoonist Society would have like a once a month dinner. Actually, just I think across the freeway there, kind of on Hotel Circle Drive. They would meet and. They'd have a dinner and an informal talk, or I think one time Sergio Aragones was a guest, and he did his great chalk talk. So I would socialize with Shel once in a while, and I think we went to there were a couple of local conventions or local shows at the Scottish Rite Center. So I would see Shel every once in a while, but he was kind of at that point, and I think he had health issues, but he was getting a little bit reclusive. So him I kind of got to know. And then the other guys, well, Scott Shaw. I mean, he's I've seen him at con every year. I mean, he went from fan to pro. I guess he's a fan and a pro. Mike Torrey was one of the guys who started con. I think he's actually the man who started the San Diego Comic Fest this year. I'm a high school math teacher, and in my math classes, I make it no secret that I'm into comics, and the kids actually kind of like that. They get a kick out of that. Tales of Comic Con and who would win in a fight, Superman or the Hulk. I mean, they like to ask me that kind of stuff. So anyway, it was no secret that I was into comics, and then it turns out that one of my students is Mike Torrey's son, and I didn't know this until they had a couple years ago at Con. They had all the founders of Comic Con on a panel together, and I don't think they'd all been in the same room together for probably years. But I saw my former student in the audience walking up to Mike Torrey, and I suddenly put it together. Oh, same last name. And the whole time that his son had been my student, he never said, "Oh, my dad started Comic Con." I mean, I would go on and on about, everybody go out to Comic Con this summer, be sure you get a ticket. He never once said that, "Oh, my dad started Comic Con." I didn't find that out until later. So I've gotten to know Mike a little bit. We cross paths every so often. The rest of them, I recognize all the names, but I can't say that I really got to know them. I remember Richard Alf, because he had a comic book store on I think on University, Richard Alf's Comic Kingdom. So I knew who they were, but I can't say that I really hung out with them. They were, they're a few years older than me too. Yeah, it's not like we really got to socialize or anything until, maybe crossing paths recently.
You brought up that as an educator that the students know that you're into comics. Do you use comics to teach math?
Well, well, for one thing, for a couple of Christmases, somebody would give me a superhero calendar. Like one year it was DC, and one year it was Marvel. So every month I would go through the changing of the calendar, and who's the superhero of the month? Iron Man. Then they'd ask, tell us about Iron Man. Well, Tony Stark was this billionaire and then I'd go on with this little spiel, and they seemed to get a kick out of that because it meant that they didn't have to do math right then, But I'd always bring it back, and they'd still have to do the homework. But using comics to teach math directly, well, actually, on one of my, I have on at least one quiz in my honors pre-calculus, I was quizzing them on exponential functions. So I said if an Action Comics #1 could be purchased for whatever, $100 in 1970, and assuming exponential growth in value by, I forget, I just picked a percentage, what would it be worth today, in today's dollars? Or, I know it's silly, but, we were doing, I gave them some trig problems where they had to use law of sines and law of cosines, and said the bat plane is flying over Gotham City on a bearing of 20 degrees, and you think I'm a nerd, don't you?
I've used superhero examples for math, so don't even worry about it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I mean, so I'd bring it in. Yeah, I mean, I would bring it in kind of a playful way, like, let's make the quiz more fun, And then I have actually reenacted a scene or two from a comic. They were struggling with a word problem, and this is hard, I can't do it. And I said, Spider-Man didn't quit. And then I brought up Spider-Man 33. He was trapped under machinery, and Aunt May was dying in the hospital, and because he had to get this special medicine to her, and he's trapped under machinery, and Dr. Octopus is getting away, and he's like, at the end of the story, I'm trapped, I failed, but no, I must be worthy, and he lifts the machinery off. And so I go through this whole thing where I'm, basically reenacting the scene from the comic, and I said, Spider-Man didn't quit, and neither can you. And they liked it. They liked it. So it's silly, but bring a little drama. And I think one time I gave a lesson once, speaking like Yoda from Star Wars the whole time. Add you must, or take the derivative of this function you must, stuff like that. So they got a kick out of it. They might not remember any of the math, but I guess they'll remember the math class at least. So I guess I made my little mark.
That's always what we could hope for. I think the example I used was if explain in a non-scientific notation how much force does the Hulk punch with.
Yeah. I mean,
fun one.
Yeah, I mean, you can bring all kinds of physics into it, and how much force could the Hulk punch with? You know, could Superman really lift, you know, a building? Or yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can bring in, and I get a kick out of bringing things like that.
Definitely.
Now and then.
Before we head into your
Oh yeah,
items
sure.
you brought, there's one last question that I know I think we've been focusing on San Diego.
Yeah.
What does San Diego mean to Comic Con, or what does Comic Con mean to San Diego?
Well, I think Comic Con. I mean, I haven't been to conventions all over the world, but I still think Comic Con is the first and foremost. There might be others that are getting as big. I hear New York Con is huge now. I haven't been to that one yet, but I mean, San Diego. It wasn't the first, but it was definitely one of the early ones, and it grew and grew, and it attracted a lot of creators. I guess, you know, I guess a lot of these guys probably, you know, maybe they lived in New York and figured, yeah, spend a few days in San Diego in the summer, you know, hang out on the beach and hang out by the pool at the El Cortez. It was probably an attractive thing at the time, and you know, they were always able to get just top-notch people in the industry, you know, to be special guests. And I just think it developed a reputation as a great convention, and it's still, I still think it's the biggest and the best. What does it mean to San Diego? Well, I will say this. I know they call it Comic Con International, but it really should be San Diego Comic Con. And don't International's fine, but I always thought it should still be called San Diego Comic Con. It should always, you know, it should always be associated as San Diego Comic Con. That's just my opinion. It puts San Diego on the map. It really does. People come from all over for this show. And I know it boosts the local economy. I mean, you can't even, I mean, you walk around downtown San Diego outside the convention. I mean, now all the, you know, restaurants and little cafes have all these Comic-Con themes. You know, you got people in costumes. The whole town is kind of, downtown area, it's kind of transformed into Comic-Con. And that's really neat to see. It's just, yeah, it's like a big, I don't know, almost a big Mardi Gras for for about you know, for 4 days. I hope it never leaves San Diego. You know, always hearing those rumors. You know, L.A. or Anaheim are trying to lure it away. I hope it never leaves San Diego. It should stay here. I've been to other shows. I've gone to WonderCon when it was in Oakland and San Francisco a bunch of times, and then, you know, Anaheim earlier this year. I've been to a couple of shows in New York, not the New York Con, but, you know, a couple of shows like 20 years ago, 30, you know, 20 something years ago. I've been to one in Oklahoma, the OFCon, Oklahoma Alliance of Fans. So I mean, I've gone to a few different shows, but San Diego is I mean, I still plan my summer around it, and I still look forward to it. Just yeah, I love it. And you know, there's always that kind of post Comic Con letdown, like it's over. I feel like it just started. Well, kind of the maybe it's my origin story, because I actually have a picture of me with my first ever comic book. Actually, I have 3 pictures of me with my first ever comic book. This is from, yeah, February 10th, 1963, because it says so on the back, actually on the back of all of them. So that's my mom and my older brother and my younger sister. The youngest sister wasn't born yet, but there's me with my face buried in a comic book. And we have 3 shots of that. I mean, I think most people remember their first comic book, but how many actually have a picture of them with it? So many years later, I got on this idea of I wanted to reacquire comic books that I'd lost from my childhood or been tossed out. And I can remember what they were, you know, almost all of them. Like, oh yeah, I remember I had that Green Lantern. Oh, I remember that, you know, that Justice League or something. And this one, I remember there was a Jetsons comic with kind of a pinkish cover. And as I was going through an old family photo album, I thought, oh wow, there's pictures of me with this comic. I remember this. I remember sitting on the steps and it had this pink cover, and then I looked at it very closely, and I was able to figure out which one it was. It was the Jetsons #2. And if you look at the photo with a magnifying glass, that is it. Now, so this is not the copy that I had, you know, when I was 3 years old, but yeah, actually I was 3. Yeah, I just barely turned 3. So that definitely was my first comic. Anyway, this is not that original copy, but I went out and found one. So the Jetsons. And little did anyone know what that would begin, what that would start. You know, my dad thought, oh, I'll bring him a couple of comics or something. It'll, you know, as a treat. And then, if he'd only known what he was setting in motion. So the next one, let's see, the next one is, it's significant to me because I was asked earlier, kind of, you know, where, how you kind of develop as a collector, and I'd mentioned, well, you kind of go through this phase where you just read them and they're disposable, and then you start saving them in little stacks, and then you want to start, you know, finding old ones and finding back issues. There's also a defining moment where you start spending your own money on them, because up, you know, for up to a certain point, you know, mom or dad would buy them as a treat, or my older brother, you know, they would get them, and then when he was done reading them, I could read them. But at some point, they started giving me an allowance, like a quarter. So at that point, I had disposable income. You know, 25 cents I could spend on anything I wanted, and I chose to spend it on a comic book. So this one is significant to me because it's the first one I actually bought with my own money, where I had that quarter burning a hole in my pocket. It only cost 12 cents, so actually, you know, I had 13 cents left over. But this is Action Comics 353. It's from, I think, around summer of 1967. And this had been a continued story. The previous issue ended in a cliffhanger. Superman had been turned to stone. How was he going to get out of it? My brother had bought the previous one, and I'd read it, and I thought, I got to see how this ends. So I saw this on the stand with this great cover, and I thought, I'm going to buy that. So that's when it began, when I started spending my own money on a comic book. So, you know, is this worth much? I don't know. This is the original one. I mean, this is the one I've had since I was 7 years old. I've got a nicer copy now, too. But I read this and read this and read this, all my comics when I was a kid. Read them. You know, I wasn't worried about, are they going to be in mint condition, you know, 30 years from now? Anyway, this one's significant because it's where and when I started actually spending my own discretionary income on comics. Of course, you know, then this was 12 cents. Usually for a quarter, you could get 2 12-centers and a piece of bubble gum. Then the dilemma was, oh, there's that 25-cent square-bound annual with all, oh, I love those. So do I spend the 25 cents on one big thick comic or get 2 12-centers and a bubble gum? Usually what I would do is go home and like beg for more chores. Like, can I earn another quarter, and, you know, so I can go back and get that big, thick, juicy 25-center before it disappears. And that's how it begins, you know. And then, yeah, now here I am. You know, oh, if I could only save up, you know, X number of dollars to get this comic book. I do pay the bills, you know. I take care of business, but yeah. So that was a significant one for me. And then this is the. You know, I have the program from the summer 1970, the 3-day con that Jack Kirby and Ray Bradbury were guests at. I have all the programs, but I only brought a couple of them with me. I brought this one because this is actually the one from March 21st, 1970, the one-day tryout con. I don't think you see these that often. It's got a kind of a generic picture. You know, it's Balboa Park on the front, but the con itself was actually at the U.S. Grant Hotel in San Diego, March 21st, 1970. It's just a couple of pages kind of folded over. There's a picture of, yeah, Forey Ackerman. A little welcome from Sheldorf and Richard Alf and Mike Torrey and Barry Alfonso, Scott Shaw, all the guys that put it together. And even then, they were advertising for the summer when it says, have a good time and write to your out-of-state friends to join you this August 1st, 2nd, and 3rd at our big 3-day con. So they were really, you know, they were promoting the summer con, and I think they knew that something this was going to grow. This was going to be a winner. Mike Royer was there. He inked a lot of Jack Kirby's work and then worked on a lot of titles of his own. Oh, on the back. Yeah, this is the program of events. Now the program book at con is like, you know, this thick. It all fit on something this size. Yeah, The Lost World. They showed that silent film, The Lost World, from 10:30 to 12. So the thing opened at 9. The dealer's room, I guess, closed around 5 or 6. And by then I had to go home. I didn't have any money left. And I'm sure my mom was getting impatient. So that's... My mom is a saint. She really is. You know, she'd drive me to this thing, and So that is the very first program, and then I brought this just because it was a newsletter that was sent out after the SummerCon of 1970. I just brought it because actually there's a picture of a young Mike Torrey there on the front. And there's Sheldorf, very young Sheldorf. But there were reprints of some newspaper articles, and I just brought it because there's a reprint of the San Diego Union, March 21st, 1970, Saturday morning, where it says there will be a one-day convention of comic book and strip collectors today in the U.S. Grand Hotel. So I saw this and thought, I gotta go. There's going to be comic books, and I want to see this. And yeah, that's where it all began. And then this one. This was 1971 when it was on the Muir campus, which was new then at UCSD. They had it at UCSD for 1 year. I just brought this one because, I mean, it's cool, and you got all the programs and all these little drawings. There's one from Will Eisner, Milton Caniff. All these artists would contribute to artwork, even just like they do now. But, program which took up 2 whole pages now. And in the back, there's actually, this is when it was small enough that they could actually print the names of all the members. So this would give you an idea. There were 112 full members, 50 supporting members. I didn't know what that meant. I guess maybe there were people that couldn't go, but they just wanted to donate something. Then there were one-day members, 6 of us, and at the very bottom you can see Peter Jones, La Jolla. That was me. So it's in writing. I was there in 1971. So do the math. That's about 118 people. I thought it was a little bigger then, but anyway, you could actually fit all the names in there. And if you go through this, if you really dig through it, you'll see you'd probably see some well-known collectors and probably some guys who are pros now. Anyway, I'm rambling. Those are just I just want to bring a few things to share. I got tons of stuff, but I didn't want to hog all the all the camera time.